angle relationships. That's what we're going to talk about today. So our running target for today is students can use angle relationships to find angle measurements. So we're going to use some of these relationships to find different angle measurements, unknown angle measurements that we have. Okay, make sure you write that down as you're heading, and then make sure you write the learning target down, and I will move on. Okay, vocabulary. All right, we have 4 vocabulary words. Some of you might have already written this down in class, but if you didn't, make sure you write them down. We have complementary angles, 2 angles for which the sum of their measures is 90 degrees. Okay, so any 2 angles that add up to 90 degrees are called complementary angles. You might see a picture like this, where I have 2 angles. I have this angle and I have that angle, and those 2 make the right angle, so together they are complementary. We have supplementary angles. That's 2 angles for which the sum of their measures is 180 degrees. And you might see a straight line, because you remember a straight line is 180 degrees, and then you might see a line coming off that. And you have angle 1 and my second angle, and together those equal a straight line, which is 180 degrees. We have vertical angles. Vertical angles are when you have 2 intersecting lines. So for vertical angles, I'm going to have 2 intersecting lines, and it's going to be the angles opposite each other. So I have 2 sets. I have set 1, which would be the top and bottom one of my drawing, and then I'd have set 2, use double arcs, so that those are opposite. Okay, and the nice thing about opposite angles and vertical angles is they are congruent to each other, which means they have the same angle measure. That becomes important. And then we have 2 adjacent angles. 2 adjacent angles are angles that share a common side and a common vertex. So if I draw an angle here, all right, and then I'm going to reuse the vertex, which is right here, the point right here where it changes directions, and one of the sides, to do that, I have adjacent angles. Okay, so this angle would be adjacent to this angle right here. They share a common vertex, and they share a common side. Okay, and there's not anything with adjacent angles that we know. They could be complementary, they could be supplementary, but they don't have to be. They are just next to each other. They just share a common point and a common vertex and a common side. Okay, if you're done writing those down, you can move on. Otherwise, go ahead and pause. All right, let's do some examples. First example, we're just going to identify some adjacent angles. So adjacent, remember, share a common vertex and a common side. I have a lot of angles in there. Okay, this little symbol here, guys, stands for an angle. That's an angle symbol. So angle 1 is adjacent to which 2 angles? Well, here's angle 1 right here. So which 2 is it next to? Well, it's adjacent to angle 6. It's adjacent to angle 2. So angle 2 and angle 6. Do not forget to put your angle symbols in front when you're talking about angles so that we know that it's an angle. Okay? Angle 2, angle 6. Okay, those are the 2 that it's sharing. It shares the vertex, and it shares a common side. That's for angle 2, and the common side there for angle 6. Okay? And B, which angle is adjacent to angle 4 and angle 2? Well, here's angle 4, and here's angle 2, which means there's only one angle that's adjacent to both of them, and that's angle 3. Okay, it's the one that's in between them, and they're adjacent. Okay, so that's how you find adjacent angles. Now, in the same drawing, I have lots of other angles. I have vertical angles. There are supplementary angles in there. So there are other angles, but this is just adjacent. Okay, if you need to pause, go ahead. Otherwise, I'm moving on. All right, in example 2, let's talk about our complementary and supplementary angles. So A, you have to know that this is a right angle, so these are our complementary angles, okay, because they equal 90 degrees. So here's how you have to show your work. You must show work on these, and we're practicing our one-step equations with these. So complementary angles are 2 angles that have a sum of 90 degrees. That means that the 2 angles added together equal 90. Well, what do we have? X plus 67 equals 90. The 2 angles added together. This is how I want you to show your work. I want you to write the equation, and then I want you to practice the equation. You solve a one-step equation. I'm adding 67, so I'm going to subtract 67 from both sides. So I get x equals, okay, and that is 23. All right, there is a degree there, so we need to have 23 degrees. So the angle measure is 23 degrees. Okay, For B, we have supplementary angles that equal 180, so I'm going to do x plus 130 equals 180 degrees. Okay, so equally 180 together. So I solve that by subtracting 130 from both sides. So I get x equals 50 degrees. And that's how you do supplementary angles. Now C is a little bit more challenging. I have three angles, 1, 2, 3, that add up to 180. It can be more than 2, so I add those three angles up. 2x plus 4x plus 3x. So all the angles that make, here's my straight line. I got to look for those straight lines. Here's my straight line, so which angles make up that straight line? Those three, and that equals 180 degrees. Okay, well, now I got to do my simplifying here. I got all my x's, so that's 6x plus 3x, that's 9x equals 180. So to solve this problem, I'm multiplying, so the inverse is to divide. Divide both sides by 9, I get x equals 20. Okay, so that means x equals 20. Each angle measure I have to figure out. 2 times 20, that's 40 degrees. 4 times 20, that is 80 degrees. And then 3 times 20 is 60 degrees. And there are my three answers, and you can check your work by adding them up. If you need to pause, go ahead. Otherwise, I'm moving on to my next example. Alright, in my last example, we're going to talk about vertical angles. Vertical angles are congruent. Make sure you write that down. That is very important. Congruent means same measure. That means they're equal to each other. Okay, so what happens here is, in A, I want to find x. So my vertical angle to x would be 142. They're the ends that are opposite each other with our intersecting lines. Okay, it's getting messy down there. So we have our vertical angles. So that means if they're equal to each other, they have the same measure, there's no work. If this is 142, that means the one across is also 142 degrees. No work, just an answer. Okay. Now for B, we're going to have some work, because the vertical angle for this one is 38 and 2y. Okay, so that means they're equal to each other, so I'm going to do 2y equals 38. Now I have to solve it. It's a one-step solve. Divide by 2. Because I'm multiplying, I divide by 2 to both sides, so I get y equals 19. Okay, so y equals 19 for that example, which would also be 38 degrees, but y equals 19, and I asked you to find y. Okay, and that is how you do vertical angles. So you have to remember vertical angles are congruent to each other, and if you go back to my course, complementary and supplementary, together they equal an amount. Complementary equals 90, supplementary equals 180. So you have three choices when you're doing these problems. Added together equal 90, added together equal 180, or the vertical angles, you make them equal to each other. Okay? Have a great night. If you need to rewatch anything, go ahead. Otherwise, I'll see you in class tomorrow.